Hello everyone, Liam here. I wanted to do a video on the Switch 2's backwards compatibility features since I've personally been quite impressed by them. Many Switch 1 games, even if they haven't been updated for it, run better on Switch 2. If you have a game on the original Switch with an unlocked frame rate especially, that might have been inconsistent, it's definitely worth popping it into a Switch 2 if you have one and seeing how it holds up on it, because I'm finding many games, even unpatched, run really well on it. Nintendo has released free updates, adding improved frame rates and higher resolutions to select games like Bowser's Fury, but I want to give a few nods to some lesser known Switch games that I think benefit from a lot of the extra horsepower, even without a patch. Some of these games you might have missed, so they're definitely worth giving a try. Hopefully the Switch 2 can be a good place for people to rediscover some of these overlooked games. I've seen a lot of people online lament the lack of a first-party 3D platformer to play at launch on the Switch 2. Well, this game might scratch that itch for you because it is the next best thing and very few people played it. Bakeru is a wonderful 3D action platformer. If you like 3D platformers and you've not played this yet, and I think a lot of people haven't, hear me out because I would strongly recommend it. This is an original IP by Goodfeel. If you're a Nintendo fan, you will probably know them as the developers of Kirby's Epic Yarn, Princess Peach Showtime, Wario Land The Shake Dimension. That was a good game, by the way, bring that back. But unlike those games, Bakeru was not published by Nintendo. It was self-published by Goodfeel in Japan back in 2023, and then was brought to the West in 2024 by Spike Chunsoft. Bakeru is a spiritual successor to the Goemon games. The president of Goodfeel, Etsunobu Ebisu, was one of the major creative forces behind those games, and he produced Bakeru. So if you like Mystical Ninja on the Nintendo 64, which Ebisu directed, definitely give this a shot. Bakeru was directed by Tadanori Sukawaki, who was the design director on Wario Land The Shake Dimension, so a lot of very talented people worked on this. Bakeru features some fairly vast open 3D levels that can be quite dense with enemies and collectibles, and on the original Switch it runs very inconsistently. I love this game, but I will readily admit that the frame rate is very up and down on the Switch. The game targets 60 frames per second, but rarely gets there. It often hovers around 40 frames per second, but can often dip well below that in some of the busier combat sections. Given the scope of the game and how much is going on sometimes, it's understandable, but definitely still an issue. On Switch 2, however, the frame rate is no longer an issue at all. There are some areas in this game where on the original Switch it chugs a lot. There's a level later in the game where you are ascending this vertical fortress, smashing through walls, getting into fights with lots of different enemies. This is mostly all one continuous world without any loading screens to interrupt it. So on the first Switch, the frame rate takes a beating. On Switch 2, all of those problems are gone. Every level I've tested on Switch 2 runs without any issues whatsoever, and it is such a huge step up. It is smooth as butter now, and it really lets the brilliance of Bakeru shine through. This is such a fun, varied 3D platformer stroke adventure game that oozes charm. Each level is based around a different real-life area of Japan, and the collectibles in this game are souvenirs from each location and facts about Japanese culture. So if you're interested in Japan and you like 3D platformers and adventure games, this is a perfect game for you. It looks amazing as well, by the way. It runs at 1080p on the TV and 720 in handheld mode, and it gives you a steady 60 frames per second in both on Switch 2. This is genuinely one of the best games to come out in the latter years of the Switch. I do hope they patch it officially to add higher resolution graphics, but it was already a very nice looking game and it's a must play in my opinion. Next one, so this recommendation is kind of a 2-in-1 because there are two Grapple Dog games on the Switch and both are worth playing. If you like Game Boy Advance era platformers, this is a must-have. These are some very endearing games developed largely by one person called Joseph Gribbin, and they are painfully overlooked. Grapple Dog is a 2D platformer where you play as a dog called Pablo who swings through levels and attacks enemies with a grapple hook. It has a very charming cast of characters with some fun dialogue, the visuals are great, levels are well designed and full of collectibles to hunt down. The sequel, however, is such a massive improvement that I think it's worth playing through the original just to get to it. Not that the original itself isn't great in its own way. Grapple Dog's Cosmic Canines, as the sequel is called, adds a second playable character called Luna, who's basically the Shadow the Hedgehog of the series. She has a gun, and as well as shooting enemies with it, she can alter her movement in midair by firing it downwards. The traversal is super fun and unique, and the design of the levels is very good. Both Grapple Dog's games on the original Switch ran largely fine, but there were some problems in the later stages which get much bigger. I remember running into some problems in these levels, and this was really my biggest problem with both of these games. The later levels get more open, more packed, and that caused the frame rate to drop quite a lot. They both targeted 60 frames per second on the original Switch, and now on Switch 2, they hit that target without any issues whatsoever. It is a locked 60 frames on even the busiest levels now, and is more or less on par with the PC version now. Don't just take my word for that, by the way. The developer did say that on Twitter recently, so there you go. I wish more people had gotten to try these games, especially the second one, because that one in particular is an overlooked gem. The developer has stated that it didn't sell well at all, so please give this one some love. It is much deserved. And yeah, please enjoy Grapple Dog and Grapple Dogs, the Cosmic Canines. Next game I want to recommend trying on Switch 2 is a bit of a change of pace. It's Cruis'n Blast. If you're an older player, you may remember the Cruis'n games. This is a long-running series owned by Nintendo that was brought back in 2017 in arcades by Raw Thrills, a company owned by Eugene Jarvis who created the series. The arcade game is super fun, and in 2021 it was ported to Switch. The Switch version is a very competent translation of the arcade game, filled with content. It's got new modes, split-screen multiplayer, and many different vehicles to unlock, including some very wacky, out-there options like a dinosaur and a UFO. Cruis'n Blast is unashamedly arcadey, over-the-top, and absolutely crazy. It's like racing through a film directed by Michael Bay or Roland Emmerich. It reminds me of Excitruck or Burnout. The tracks morph and fall apart around you as you race through them, and you can perform takedowns to knock the other players out of the running. On Switch 1 it ran decently, but when the action got crazy, there were some compromises to the performance, I remember. On Switch 2, it looks and plays so good. This is one of the more impressive Switch 1 games that I've tested on Switch 2. It hit 60 frames in handheld mode and TV mode. The image quality is good, so the graphics look crisp, but now it also feels super smooth. I think more people need to give this game a shot because everyone I know who has done so has had a really good time with it. It's so easy to pick up and play. It's very accessible, so I think just about anyone would enjoy it. You can get this game physically and digitally, usually pretty cheap, so I highly recommend it since, as we know, there are no racing games to play on Switch 2 right now. Around the launch of the Switch, there was a brilliant game that came out called Graceful Explosion Machine, a unique horizontal shoot 'em up. You had to rack up the biggest combo possible by shooting enemies with different attacks and avoiding taking damage. That game is worth playing, but in this video, I'm actually going to recommend another game from the same developer that you are more likely to have missed. Super Crush KO was the game that Vertex Pop made after Graceful Explosion Machine, and it really is the formula of that game applied to a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up stroke platformer. You play as a girl who goes on a warpath after an evil woman kidnaps her cat, which is understandable. Super Crush KO is maybe best described as a 2D character action game like Bayonetta, but with more arcade sensibilities. You have to punch and shoot robots on your way across town, making sure to keep your combo going by avoiding damage and consistently hitting enemies. You get more points by varying up your attacks and by launching them up in the air or zooming towards the ground with a downwards kick. The gameplay is fairly straightforward, and the fun comes from trying to keep your combo going and racking up these insane scores. It's all about timing, momentum, and flow, staying focused, stringing together attacks and dodges at the same time. Like Graceful Explosion Machine, you can very quickly and easily submit your high scores for each level and compare them to your friends, so it can become very addictive trying to beat theirs and get the top grades for each level. On Switch 1, this game mostly ran fairly well, targeting 60 frames per second, but did drop in some busier areas, unlike Graceful Explosion Machine, which seemed to run a bit more steadily from what I can remember. On Switch 2, though, that is no longer an issue. It runs flawlessly, and it looks really good in handheld mode and on a bigger screen. The stylized 2D visuals do well to disguise the lack of a resolution upgrade in my opinion, so it looks very sharp as well as feeling very smooth and responsive. Cluster Truck is a physics-based first-person 3D platformer where you have to run and jump over a convoy of trucks, leaping between them and other obstacles to reach an end goal. It starts off very simple and easy to get into. You're just using the stick and the A button to jump, but gradually it becomes more challenging and adds some complexity as you unlock more abilities like being able to slow down time or dash horizontally. This mostly ran well on the Switch, but as it went along and the amount of physics-based objects the game was rendering all at once increased, it could get a little inconsistent. On Switch 2, it runs at a steady 60 frames per second, and it feels great. The game always loaded very quickly on Switch, and that is especially true on Switch 2, as you would expect. You can retry any level instantly with a single button press, and entering a level from the menu takes less than a couple of seconds. You're going to find yourself retrying levels again and again, so this definitely helps mitigate frustration and keeps you engaged. Cluster Truck is fun, challenging, very unique, it's total chaos, and the Switch 2's horsepower makes easy work of all the physics-based objects smashing into one another and flying all over the place. If you want a game that's very easy to pick up and play but hard to put down, give this one a shot. Next up is a game that I personally really connected with. It's Lil Gator Game, which came out back in December 2022 on Switch. This is a 3D adventure game that takes a lot of cues from Zelda, particularly Breath of the Wild. It has a cel-shaded visual style very reminiscent of Wind Waker, and exploration and quest design more akin to Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but it's much more approachable and easy to pick up than either of those in my opinion. You play as a young alligator with a very active imagination who basically enjoys playing outdoors and fantasizing about being Link from The Legend of Zelda. They obviously don't name drop the series, but that's clearly what it's supposed to be. In a flashback, we see that his older sister used to play along with him and set up cardboard monsters for him to smash, but nowadays she's become more distant as she studies to become a game developer. It feels like a very personal and well-observed story about a sibling relationship, and it's surprisingly touching. You roam around this fairly wide-open 3D environment, smashing monsters made of crafts and collecting them to complete quests and help out the people you encounter in exchange for them joining your game. The movement is very Breath of the Wild-esque, featuring shield surfing and gliding, but the movement and controls feel breezier and more accessible. It wears the Zelda influence very much on its sleeve, but it feels more like a loving tribute rather than an attempt at imitating it. If you've played games like A Short Hike, it feels a lot like that game to me. Very cozy, charming, heartwarming, and surprisingly funny as well. The exploration and quest design is fairly simple, but a lot of fun, often allowing you to unlock some fun costumes and different weapons for your character. On Switch it had a target of 60 frames per second and ran largely fine, but definitely wasn't perfect. Sometimes I did notice some variations in the performance back then, but playing it again on Switch 2, it seems to have reached a locked 60 and is now on par with the other versions of it that have since released on more powerful platforms. This was already a good looking game with a simple but appealing visual style, but now it feels as smooth as it does on the Xbox Series X. I feel like a lot of people missed out on this, but it is such a nice little game with a very big heart, and it is definitely worth playing. I think the audience for games like this, 3D platformers and adventure games with this type of art style, is mostly on Nintendo consoles, and now with this performance increase, people should definitely try it out if they missed it when it first came out. Fire Emblem Three Hopes. This is probably the one on my list that most stretches the definition of overlooked, because I don't think it was a flop by any means, but in terms of the Nintendo Warriors games, this seems to be the one that I see people bring up the least, which is a shame since I think it might be my favorite. This released 2 years after Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity on Switch, and it was a surprise to me to see how much better this ran in comparison to it. Three Hopes blends the Warriors formula with the RPG and sim life elements of Fire Emblem Three Houses, and the result is a very addictive hack and slash RPG mashup that is very easy to sink a lot of hours into. It has that fun power fantasy gameplay you would expect from a Musou game, with the class matchup system and RPG leveling up and management systems from Fire Emblem. You can also customize your party throughout the campaign and bond characters together. You can unlock the support cutscenes. There are many of those. They're all fully voice acted, and it has some interesting player choice elements as well. If you've played Three Houses, you know what to expect from a lot of that, and I found it just as soul-suckingly addictive as I did in that game. As I said, it targeted 60 frames on Switch 1 and ran fairly well by the standards of these games, but on Switch 2, it reaches a steady 60 frames per second in TV mode and on the handheld. It looks and feels great, so check that out if you like Fire Emblem. Now, when I said I was going to do this video, a couple of people, unsurprisingly, brought this one up, and so I feel a little obligated to include it, but if you followed me for a while, this shouldn't come as a surprise. You know this is, or you may know, this is one of my favorite games of all time. I was glad to see Bayonetta 3 runs a lot better on Switch 2, but I'm here now to give it up to the GOAT, a game that I much prefer, and that's the wonderful 101, which is one of my favorite action games of all time. It was directed by Hideki Kamiya, who did Okami and Beautiful Joe, Bayonetta. It takes cues from all of those games and creates something wholly unique and incredibly intricate. A lot of people completely ignore this because they think it's going to be like Pikmin or something, but it's not. This is basically a character action game in the vein of Bayonetta or Devil May Cry. You juggle enemies into elaborate combos with lots of flashy attacks and participate in insane action set pieces and huge boss fights that are absolutely brilliant. Its story works as a send-up of Sentai and superhero tropes, but there's some genuinely good world building and character writing in there too. I get a little tired of espousing the virtues of this game, but to put it into perspective, I played the Wii U version a lot, and when this was released again on the Switch years later, I was still discovering new moves in it well after I'd completed it again and gotten all the characters. The combat system is so deceptively deep, and mastering it takes a while, but when you get there, it really is unlike anything else. The Switch version, called the Wonderful 101 Remastered, presented a slight improvement over the Wii U game when it came out. It polished up some minor aspects of the gameplay and it ran a bit better, but it still had some frame rate drops here and there. On Switch 2, it offers a solid 60 frames in TV mode or on the handheld screen. Even without a patch, it feels noticeably better. It also loads extremely quickly now. Levels load in right away, and booting the game up takes noticeably less time than on Switch, and especially Wii U. God, don't get me started on that, bloody hell. But another thing I should mention is that Platinum did release a 2-part story DLC add-on for the remastered version, which is a side-scrolling shooter type game, and that was pretty good, although it didn't run great on the original Switch. Now on Switch 2, it seems to hit 60 frames per second with no problems from what I can see. The DLC, which is called The Wonderful One After School Hero, might be worth checking out if you're a fan of the original game already, but I just want to recommend yet again that more people try out The Wonderful 101. Playing it on Switch 2 is the best way to play it on a Nintendo console. It's an incredible action game with one of the best final acts in any video game I've ever played. No spoilers, it's just that good. And don't spoil it for yourself, by the way. You gotta play it, see how the story builds up to it, see the climax. It's so goddamn good. By the way, I did a video on the history of The Wonderful 101 a while ago for Did You Know Gaming. Check that out if you haven't already. Link will be in the description, or you can hit the card in this video. They went through a lot to ship this game, and its history is surprisingly interesting, in my opinion. Anyway, if you have any Switch 1 games that play better on Switch 2 and you want to shout them out, drop them in the comments. If you want to hear more from me, check out my Patreon. I do exclusive videos and podcasts where I'm always sharing my thoughts on the latest news and games and rumors. Thank you to the very kind people who've supported me on Patreon already, whose names you see here. And a huge thank you to my gold tier and up supporters, who are Says the Cube, Eric Schussler, Jack Craig, Shawnick, and Stuart Radley. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.